Oui, ça va.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 3 o'clock in Bangkok time, and in Geneviève Greer's time, it's 9 a.m. in London. And
Yes.
I'm opening the program now. Geneviève will give us a presentation today. Aside from the content, she will share with us the use of Q methodology and also of in vivo. And I'd like to request our PhD student, Chris, who is right now in Yangon, Myanmar, to share with us the bio of Geneviève Greer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ray. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris, and a third-year PhD student at the Department of Peace Study, Payap University. Today, it is a great honor for me to take the role of introducing our special guest speaker, Ms. Geneviève Greer from Ulster University, United Kingdom. I also want to thank Dr. Ray and Department of Peace Study. So today, Ms. Geneviève will give a qualitative empirical social science presentation on education in conflict and crisis. She will discuss the use of Q methodology and in vivo for qualitative data analysis in this session. The title of today's topic is Perspectives of Practitioners Designing Education Programs in Conflict and Crisis, Exploring Injustice. So please let me introduce the biodata of our speaker. Ms. Geneviève has worked in international development in education in conflict and crisis for over a decade, designing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the programs. She has expertise in girls' education and education in protracted crisis, having worked on a range of projects for international organizations, including the Save the Children in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Niger. Ms. Geneviève has also worked as a consultant for a range of organizations, including carrying out a program in West Africa with the global practitioners. Regarding her education, Ms. Geneviève completed her master's with distinction in education, health promotion, and international development at UCL Institute of Education, with research focused on integrated programs in Somalia. She is bilingual as a dual French-British citizen and completed her first-class dual honor BA degrees in French and History of Arts at Bristol University, focusing on critical theory and post-colonial French literature. She is passionate about social and environmental justice and has a better understanding of interactions with injustice and complex systems. Ms. Geneviève, current PhD research at Ulster University UNESCO Center, explore the role of international actors from the global north and south, designing education programs for conflict and crisis contexts. She is using Q methodology and political economy analysis to investigate the sensitivities, injustice, and power imbalances of actors involved in designing education programs to help practitioners reflect on the sum of the theoretical, moral, and practical challenges educationalists face in attempting to fulfill right to the education, quality education, and justice in the complex system. So this is a short introduction about our special guest speaker, and I also like to thank Ms. Geneviève for sharing her time and sharing knowledge with us, and that will be beneficial to all of the participants in today's sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And before we proceed, I'd like to quickly recognize the presence of everyone in the room, most of whom are PhD students and others. Brian, please raise your hand, is from the US, our PhD student. And we have Franklin, he's from Myanmar. Did you raise your hand? Yeah, thank you. And Naro is from Northeast India. Yeah. And then your name, please. Okay, from Myanmar. And then Dr. Lee is our chair of the Department of Peace Studies. And Professor Safora, she's visiting us. And Greer is from Northeast India, but working the refugee camp in the border of Myanmar and Thailand. Sai is from Myanmar. Mio is from Myanmar. And then we have our Buddhist monk from Myanmar, who's studying with us here, as well as Dr. Khan doing his second PhD. Okay, so
wow.
we have people here in the room and others in the online.
Not second PhD.
Okay, second doctorate.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So he had a doctorate in divinity and now the PhD. And I'd like to call on Naro to read the abstract of Geneviève, and then we'll go to the presentation.
Hello everyone. Okay. Hello everyone. A special greeting to our guest speaker for this afternoon session, and also greeting to all the participants here. I'm Naro, and for this evening presentation, I will highlight the abstract of our discussion. For this evening, the topic is the Q methodology and vivo perspective of practitioner designing education program in conflict, and tries exploring injustice research is critically examining the role by actors from the global north and south in designing education program for conflicts and crisis context. Practitioner discussion and the literature highlight the tension faced by the humanitarian and development actors, yet the perspective and the political economic landscape and education program designer who play an influential role in education system remain under research. This research set the scene of education program designing ecosystem to better understand the influence, looking at the factor that drive education intervention and how practitioner balance the global technical application imposed by donor and moral drive towards equity, social justice, and localization, drawing on in-depth Q methodological qualitative interview with 30 education program designers, and this research explored the perspective revealing the four viewpoints. The injustice model helped to analyze the historic, structural, epistemic, and new colonial injustice challenge that often constrain education program, building a concept of education actor as implicate subject. The research reversed the white case and also providing opportunity for critical reflection on education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naro.
Thank you. Okay, is it my turn?
Sorry, I'd now like to turn on the floor now to Geneviève.
Okay, what I'm going to do is try and share my screen, and I'm hoping that you will then see the presentation. So you just have a look to see here. Let's see. Share.
Share button. There's a share button top right.
Yes, I'm just pressing it.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully it will work.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you so much.
You can?
Yeah, we can see it, yes.
Okay. Great. So I'm really delighted to join you today to share insights into my PhD research. And it's really great to see that there are so many of you from different contexts as well. A lot of my research is about thinking about being an international actor in another context, but also when you're working with other people who come from other contexts, and you're working in a conflict and crisis context, things get in already complex contexts, they get even more complex. And as PhD researchers and academics and practitioners, I guess it's an opportunity to really share in some critical reflection on the relationships between education, conflict, peace, and the global actors that devise education strategies, which is a key part of my work. So this series of presentations organised by Dr. Rey is really it's fantastic, and I'm really pleased to be able to share my research with you. And a big part of my work as well is about shared learning. So as much as I'm so delighted to share the sort of my PhD research with you, but this will also be an opportunity for me to learn from you and get feedback on how you feel about the research too. So today we're going to reverse the gaze a little bit and reflect on the people and perspectives behind the education programs that I'm sure a lot of you have been involved in, whether through your research or your work. Okay, so let's see if I can get onto the next slide. Let's see if it's going to let me do this now. This is when so I'm actually looking at another. Okay. So I wanted to first of all give a little bit of background and context about me. Before I worked my PhD, as what your colleague mentioned, I worked as a practitioner for 15 years, designing programs in complex contexts like the DRC. And the image in the background here is a photo that I took in DRC, and it was when I was I was taking part in a big randomized controlled trial research evaluation, and we were collecting a lot of data, going to lots of different schools, and very, very focused on collecting lots and lots of quantitative data. And on this door, in one of the classrooms, was written, and I don't know whether it was a child or a teacher who wrote it, but it says "Bientôt la fin de souffrance," which is written in French, which is which is a kind of, I guess, a colonial language, which is often used which is used in teaching in DRC in Congo, and it says "soon the end of suffering," and it's a very, I guess, powerful message which a child has written on the door. I don't know who wrote it, but as part of this, DRC Congo has a very long history of violence and conflict, and particularly violence against women and girls. And the program that I was part of was very much targeted to supporting girls' education, which is a very noble and kind of aim. But about 10 years later, I read a report that this particular program, which provided scholarships to girls, there was backlash from the boys because they were frustrated that they weren't receiving the scholarships. And so this image is really, I guess, a reminder of how even when I wasn't the one who designed the program, but you often become part of projects which maybe somebody else has designed with good intentions. The intentions were good. They wanted to provide education to girls many of whom didn't have access to education before. But we often become, Novelli and Rothberg use the term implicated subjects, in that we often become implicated in some of the injustices in projects and programs without realizing it and without the intention. And so part of my research is to explore some of those tensions and issues as researchers, as practitioners. When you're part of an education program, sometimes there are, I guess, unintended side effects which happen. And so my research really looks to explore some of those issues around who are the educations designing these programs, and what are they influenced by. I hope that's helpful. And this particular diagram, when I started doing a lot of the research and looking at some of the gaps, I found that program designers face a lot of tensions. And this is something that Novelli has written quite a lot about tensions between global north and global south. Well, I don't really like those terms, but you know, I guess a lot of people use them, and between sort of neoliberal efficiency and sort of global technical aims towards education. So often like randomized controlled trials, for example, or trying to prove what works in education. And on the other side are aims towards social justice and equity, and a focus more on the kind of localization of education. And so there's often these pulling factors that you're faced with as a practitioner. How do you deliver on all of those different things? And a lot more research has been coming out recently from Jessica Oddy and others, that often local actor involvement in program design is often tokenistic. And so often donor requirements are often prioritized over community knowledge. And I don't know whether some of you have probably experienced this, but if you're writing reports for donors or writing proposals, it's often the donors' priorities which will take precedence. And so what I wanted to do is Jessica Oddy identified that there's further studies needed to turn, especially education in emergencies, she calls it the myopic gaze, inwards towards the systems and practitioners, to understand further the people, their motivations, their resistance, and I guess their complicity as effectively as implicated subjects in a really inequitable system. So this led me to two research questions. The first was, what are the influences over education program design in context of conflicts and crisis? And the second is, how do education program designer perspectives interact with injustices? And so to think about the political economy landscape around education program designers, I use Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, and I sort of put education program designers in the middle, and then thought about the microsystemic, the individual factors that they have around sort of gender, race, sort of their religious identities, and then on the microsystem is all about the organizational hierarchies that they might be part of, and the relationships between INGOs. Maybe if they're working in a consortium of organizations, what are the different tensions with as partners? And then I looked at considerations of the role of the private sector. And then in the next layer is mesosystemic issues around processes, and might be education clusters, or what's the role of global standards like the INEE, and relationships with donors. And on the exosystemic factors, there's things like the global agendas, the SDGs, the UN child rights, and all the kind of laws and legal mandates, and how you interact with government agencies and ministries of education. And then on the very outside, it's about thinking about what are the broader tensions and influences like globalization, conflicts and crisis, or even the climate and sort of natural disasters, and the wider social and political and economic context. And then what's useful with Bronfenbrenner's ecological model is that he also thinks about the chrono system, so what happens over time. So I was looking also back to, okay, what's the colonial history that influences all of these program designs, but also looking forward to the goals and aims that we have around Sustainable Development Goal 2030. And so then I also use a conceptual framework to start thinking about injustices. And this is a model by Kelsey Shanks. She's actually my professor, and it was developed to better understand the persistent challenges that often constrain education programming, particularly programs operating in that, what they call the triple nexus. So between humanitarian, development and peace, and the idea that those three things should be working together. Unfortunately, what often happens is that there are these three injustices which interact. Epistemic injustice, so which is really about looking at the way local knowledge is often undervalued. Neocolonial injustice, and the way northern approaches, so Western and northern approaches, often dominate and shape agendas and programs, often serving interests external to learners. So it might be prioritizing donor interests over local and community and national interests. And then structural and historic injustice really looks at the unequal power dynamics in and through education. So it might be looking at horizontal inequalities. France has done a lot of work around this. And that's really helpful to think about if a program inadvertently focuses only on an urban but excludes the rural area. What are the kind of horizontal inequalities that can happen by if you focus on one particular area but you're excluding another? What are the inequalities that can happen because of that? I hope this is helpful, and I'm going to then talk about the research design and methodology. And I understand that you're all interested in looking at understanding the methodology that I used. So Q methodology is was identified, and so I used Q methodology and in-depth qualitative interviews to explore the research questions. And Q is a inherently mixed methodology, and it's for studying perspectives and complex issues. It identifies differences in what people think, as well as common viewpoints or shared meaning. And the ecosystemic model, which I showed you, which is the kind of almost like a kind of big onion with all the layers, formed the basis of 45 statements, which represent the overall opinions on the topic. And what I did to do that was that I used the kind of that model with the tensions. I wanted to get the idea with Q methodology is that you want to get what's called a concourse, and you want to get a broad range of opinions. Is Q methodology free? And okay, I'll go on to that later. So the idea with Q methodology is that you bring together a number of statements. So I did a pilot initially of 40, I think it was 53 statements, and then that went down to 45. And I don't know if you can see here, but on step number 5, there's a kind of grid. And what you ask participants to do is to look through those statements. So I had 45 statements that I asked people to look through, and they really represented a range of views on education program design. And I wanted to reflect everything. Some had a more kind of neoliberal efficiency and kind of technical focus, and others were more focused on kind of social justice and equity. And with Q methodology, you often want a statement that people will have a reaction to. So you want people to either you want it to be a statement that makes people think something and react. So it might be, and then they put it on the grid. And what's helpful about it, rather than a survey or a Likert survey, which often people just go in and they say yes, agree, disagree, and they go through it quite quickly, and you just get, okay, well, how prevalent people's what do people think about a topic? With Q methodology, it really you can also do it without software. You can do it in person, and this is how it started. It started in the 1930s by an academic called William Stevenson, who was actually a kind of he was into physics and psychology. And what the approach basically helps you to do, it it incorporates factor analysis. So it groups, once people have sorted their statements, you then are able to kind of compute all of those different sorts, Q sorts, and it provides you with a number of different, it groups people's opinions into 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how you do the computation, into similar viewpoints. So people who have shared, they group the statements in a similar way. And so this is something which actually you can also do, which is quite nice. I've also heard that you can do it with images. So for people who perhaps aren't literate, you might want to discuss concepts with them. And you can also, so you can have printed cards, and you have a physical cue grid, and it's a really nice way of people kind of interact. It's quite nice when it is a physical thing to be able to move them around and really think about what's most important to me. So on my cue sort, I had most like how I think on one side and least like how I think. And so on the two ends, there were 2 statements out of the 45, which I asked people to choose the statements which they found most like how they think. What I'm going to do a little bit later, I don't know whether it's helpful. I've got a video which was the instruction video for my participants, and I'm happy I can share that with you now, or I can share it with you at the end. What would be best, Ray?
Maybe better now, since we're on the topic, please.
Yeah. Okay. I'm focusing more on this because I know you wanted lots on the methodology, so I hope that's okay. All right, let's have a look. And this maybe will make a little bit more sense, because this is what my participants. So I made this video using it's something called Loom, Loom, and it's something which lots of teachers and educators in the UK and I guess globally used during lockdown, during COVID, when they wanted to make videos for their students. And it basically enables you to kind of record your face and also talk through a presentation at the same time. So it's quite useful. So and it's free for kind of short videos, so it's actually quite a good tool. I'll show
this is a brief video on how to complete the Q sort. So at this stage, you'll be presented with a range of statements with different opinions on education program design in conflict and crisis. And what I'd like to do at this stage is to read through all of the statements and then use these icons to decide whether it is a statement that is represents how you think. And if so, if it's most like how you think, then you click on the thumbs up icon. And if it's a statement which is least like how you think, then you click on the thumbs down icon. And then if you're not sure, you can click on the question mark icon. And then what I'd like you to do is to keep going until you have pre-sorted all of the statements. Now, the key here is that there is no right or wrong answer. And it can, you can, at the next stage, your pre-sorted statements will be presented, and then you can also change your mind. So once that's done, you'll then be asked to go to the next stage.
So that would normally take a lot longer.
You will find your pre-sorted statements in 3 piles and a grid. And on this grid, on one hand, there's most like how you think, and on the left-hand side, least like how you think. What I'd like you to do first is to open up the pile where you clicked on thumbs up and expand that pile and look through the statements. From these, I'd like you to decide on the 2 that you feel most strongly about and put those in the right-hand side. Next, choose the following 3 statements. And then keep doing this until you've completed a number of statements. You can then close this and open up and look at the pile which were least like how you think, and then choose the 2 statements that you felt most strongly were least like how you think. And then what you can then do is close those piles, open them up, and then start to populate the grid. You can then zoom in, and you can then swap statements around. The statements in the same column have equal weighting. So you keep going. And if you want, you can click on the question mark bubble to give you some further instruction. And as I said, there is no right or wrong answer, and you can keep, you need to just keep going until you've completed all of the statements. You can zoom in with your mouse or with this button here, and you can move things around. And I'm just doing this quickly now. And it's important to say that if you find yourself with most of them in the pile, which are most like how you think, that's okay. This is just a sliding scale. And in follow-up interviews, I'll also ask perhaps where the neutral line might sit for you.
Okay, I think
and then
we can stop there. So I hope that was helpful and gave you an idea of how that platform works. In answer to your question, Ray, that particular platform, you do have to pay a subscription. So I had a research grant and I had to pay, I think, so I was able to use that, which was helpful. But I think I'm trying to remember now. It's not cheap. It's about, I think there is a student one, and I think it's about $99 a month. Yes, and with that, I think you can have one study at a time. So one thing to bear in mind is when I did the pilot, I did that, and then I had to kind of delete it to create another one. And I think on the Q method, I can send you a link to it's called Q method software. But I guess the key thing to say is with this method, it started off with it's very much about sort of much more tangible. So with literally, you would cut out the cards and people would manipulate them in a big physical grid. Hello? And so the reason, and I guess one of the reasons I decided with, oh, hello?
Hello.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought there was a question. It's okay. And one of the reasons I decided to do that is because I wanted to speak to global practitioners. So actually, this takes me nicely onto the next slide. So in Q methodology, it's called the participants are called the P set. And so I decided that I wanted to speak to between 30 and 40 practitioners. So what normally happens with Q methodology as well, you don't need a huge number of people. You need less people than statements. That's one of the key things. And it's really not about having more people in your study. That's not the aim. It's more about the statements that you create and the participants that you choose are more important. So they almost become the most important part of your study. You want to speak to people who you think will have something interesting to say about the topic, and people that might have different, maybe conflicting views on a topic. And so I wanted to speak to Global North, so people who work in the Global North but on conflict and crisis context, but also national and international practitioners who work in the Global South. And I wanted to speak to a mix of people from INGOs also people who work for the private sector, and independent consultants. And what I found is that, and I don't know if it's the same thing for all of you, but actually is that often people will work for a range of different organisations. You don't always work with INGOs. You'll sometimes work with the private sector. You'll sometimes work with, with academic institutions. And so for me, it was important that it wasn't just one particular group, because lots of different people are involved in designing education programmes. And so then I'll go down to the next. Sorry, just trying to move my mouse. I've got two screens going on, so I'm trying to get to the next one. You have to excuse me. Right, here we go. So, so as part of the Q Method software, what's quite useful is that you can include a short survey at the beginning. And so I had about sort of 10 sort of quite simple demographic questions. So I wanted to know which organisations that people had worked for, which countries people had worked for or had designed programmes for. And what was quite interesting, so there were 30 practitioners, were from 19 different countries, and they had worked with 76 different education systems worldwide. So practitioners had worked between 1 and 39 countries. And I think what's quite interesting there is to think that often what happens is that people will sort of take policies or concepts from one context and then apply it in another. And that's not to say, I guess there is an issue, isn't there, often of kind of copy and paste, and it raises big questions about whether those approaches are appropriate for those different contexts. And so most of them have worked for organisations like UNICEF, Save the Children, IRC, but also Creative Associates, FHI 360, and Cambridge Education as some of the private sector participants as well. But predominantly they worked for INGOs. And actually, I didn't have as many from your region. Actually, it was predominantly Africa and the Middle East. So it would have been it would be interesting. Maybe one of the things I was thinking is that some of the statements that are used as part of this study, it could be interesting to do it in other contexts to see how practitioners, local and national, how they sort the Q sort the statements. So some of the what happens what happens with Q methodology software is that it collects all of the different Q sorts, and then what's helpful is that it's holding all the information there, and you're able to run the different Q factor analyses through the system. Oh, okay. I'll in the Q&A, a question on females. Yeah, I will. I can actually tell you. Yeah, so there were more females in the study, and I guess that's in general. There's quite a sort of particularly in, I guess, maybe in INGOs, there's often a kind of what they call feminization of the education sector. So there were about, I think, 70% of the participants in my study were female, and so that, I guess, is reflective of often there's often female practitioners working in this space. And so there were 4 viewpoints that emerged, and what I then did was think about I then sort of named them. So one of the viewpoints was more around, really had an interest and focus on critical justice thinking. So they were quite critical of the sector. They were really interested in social justice issues. The second viewpoint which emerged was really about sort of youth future thinking. So thinking about innovation, youth and climate, and very much looking forward. The third group were global systems thinking, and I would say that they're almost more kind of traditionalists. They're really interested in systems, but also partnerships and global technical evidence, and promoting global technical evidence, and sort of, I guess, focus more on the development side of education. And then the fourth group, fourth viewpoint was mainly sort of humanitarian, sort of pragmatist thinking. So they very much kind of thought there isn't really time to sort of think about the unintended consequences of education. You just have to get on and do it. So these are often practitioners who are working maybe in sort of quite well, or currently working in conflict and crisis settings now, and potentially working in a lot with the education clusters and things like that. So what's quite interesting is that I was then able to look at how the different viewpoints correlate, and so there is overlap between them. So what Q methodology allows you to do is to think about, so people don't just align with one viewpoint. They might align primarily with one, but then some of them they'll align with another viewpoint secondarily. And so what's really helpful is that you can kind of see where people tend to group around certain statements or certain ideas. And so viewpoint one, who are the kind of idealists and the kind of critics of the ones who sort of really focus on social justice. There were 4 actors that aligned with that viewpoint only, but then 11 actors in total aligned with that primarily, and then 4 secondarily. And so the most prominent viewpoints were viewpoint 1 and 3, which is the social justice and critical justice thinking and global systems thinkers. And what was great is that I also shared the descriptions of the viewpoints with the participants and asked them as well, which one did they recognize, or did they feel represented the way they think, and did they know anyone in the sector who represented that? So what it also enables you to do is I created a kind of I guess a short statement about sort of about under 300 words, almost like a little abstract of each viewpoint, which used the most prevalent statements to, I guess, to narrate that viewpoint. Does that make sense? So if critical justice practitioners really they placed a statement on saviors, white saviors, and the belief that there's a lot of white saviors in the sector, then that came out strongly in the viewpoint description. Let me have a look at the question. Hang on. Oh, hang on. I'm just having to move over. And so I can't see the question. Oh, I'll have to look at it in a minute. And so some of the common themes that came out, the biggest sort of, I guess, shared meaning that was strongest with practitioners was that localization efforts need to go beyond surface level handovers at the end of a project. They should include collaborative decision making from the start. So this is the statement which, across 3 of the viewpoints, the most people placed as most like how they think. So this is a statement which really resonated for people. And I guess this really comes down to, often there's a lot of rhetoric around localization. You might put it in your proposal, you might say that this is locally led, that this is locally designed, but often it's quite tokenistic, and that the decisions and the design is not done in a collaborative way, and therefore the project probably isn't going to be very sustainable. I don't know if you've had this, but in proposals you often talk about sustainability, but unless it's designed with the people, for the people, that they're not going to continue with the activities afterwards. Your project won't be sustainable. And so I think there's a real desire in the sector to try and be more collaborative and do more co-design, but there's a lot of challenges. I think people feel quite constrained to be able to do that. And so I also use, so then I used, so what happens with Q methodology, so you have your, after you've done your factor analysis, I then used, I did follow-up interviews with each participant, an interview of about an hour long, where I asked them about their Q sort, and I asked them to reflect on, okay, and we talked through mainly the statements which they most agreed or kind of disagreed with, the ones that they felt most strongly about, and then we talked through that. And it was, what's quite helpful with that is that we were able to have conversations about what would be normally termed, I guess, quite difficult topics, because people they're already aware of the topic, they've engaged with it, they've decided that it's something important to them, and then you're asking them, okay, why did that resonate with you, or why didn't that resonate with you? And so then it's a really nice opportunity for people to share their thinking. And so as part of the interviews, because it was I did it on Microsoft Teams, so on this, everything was transcribed, which was really helpful. So as we know, the transcription part of transcribing interviews can be really time consuming. So I was very lucky in that I already had a transcript, which I then edited and checked. And then I went through each one. And I don't actually, it might be helpful at this stage, I can actually show you my approach to the coding of the interviews, because I think this is something you wanted me to look at or to describe, and the role of in vivo. So I guess the key thing to say is in vivo will not analyze your data for you. It is just a tool. You don't need it. You can, I would say, I started off actually with a table. So I don't know if you can see here, interview notes and transcript. So almost just having it as a table. You have your interview notes and your transcript in one column, and then you have another column next to it. And so you're literally reading your notes, and then I did almost four, I'd say 4 different readings of the transcript. The first reading was a very sort of simple descriptive coding, I guess, which you could term labeling. And so what I first of all did is kind of pull out the keywords, the key things that really kind of that sort of sung out from what they were talking about. And I was thinking always about those tensions between equity, efficiency. I was thinking about those things which had influenced the political economy analysis that I'd done. And then what you can then do is put your transcripts, upload them into In Vivo, and literally In Vivo is a place to organize your data. That's ultimately, it's a tool to organize and help you code, but it doesn't do the coding for you. You can just as easily do it on paper. It's just a helpful way of organizing all of your data, but you can do it on paper. And then I did a kind of second reading of the data and thought about a more reflexive reading and thinking about my role as the interviewer, but also my role as a practitioner and the power that I have, and the questions that I asked practitioners as well. And then the third reading, which is more kind of interpretive coding, so that was more thematic. So I started thinking, okay, and I started grouping them into the injustices. So when people started talking about things that were related to epistemic injustices, so where they talked about local knowledge being devalued, or where they talked about neo-colonial structures, then I would code sections of the transcript under those different themes. And then I also started thinking about what are the things that the kind of common themes that kept coming up on multiple occasions. And so that was a kind of, I guess, almost like a fourth reading. So I hope that's helpful. And then basically what ended up coming out was that I found that these were the three different areas that emerged. So there were global local tensions, and there was a real local knowledge emphasis, but then also critical views on external influence. Under the equity and efficiency tensions, there were lots of discussions around conflict sensitivity and peace building, and the role that those do or don't have within education programming. And then there were also lots of themes around the private sector and technology. These were also based on the statements that I had developed. But then there were also things around youth engagement and participation. And so with each of these common themes, these were themes that were common across all the different viewpoints, but in different viewpoints, some came out stronger. So for example, the local global tensions were really, really strong in the viewpoint 1, which was the sort of critical justice and social justice idealist thinkers, because they were very, very kind of committed to local programming, and also the global systems thinking practitioners. Whereas for the viewpoint 2, the youth engagement and participation was a really, really strong theme, and most important for them, and a big influence on how they design programs. And then there was also another one around moral and ethical tensions, so the power dynamics and accountability, and also discussions around multi-sectoral or adaptive approaches. That was another strong theme. I'm just trying to think where I am. How are we doing on time?
We're fine.
Yes. Okay.
We're okay. Thank you.
So then what I did was, once I had done all of that analysis, I applied. So yeah, as part of this third reading, which is on here, I really started to think about, okay, what are the interactions with injustices that have been revealed through the interviews with practitioners? So, and a lot of this was discussions uncovered, I guess, unspoken injustices that practitioners see in their work. And so practitioners revealed, horizontal inequalities, especially of religion in education. And they were talking. There was also talk about a kind of a fear of engaging with religious education. I think because almost of an epistemic blindness of not actually understanding a different religion or a different worldview. So I think there is a tendency within the international sector to, especially within human rights, of a very a-religious and non-religious approach. But that's not the reality. That's not taking into account the way that other people see the world and the priorities for them, and the importance of potentially religious education or religion within children and communities' lives. And so when we were there were lots of themes around neo-colonial injustice, and I think often practitioners really feel the dominance of Western and Northern influence through the powerful influence of funders. So funding from international organizations can really dictate how your project is designed and run. And so the research revealed that practitioners become embroiled in like a kind of game of double standards, where the donor agenda eclipses the needs that practitioners see on the ground. And I think there's often yeah, I think they feel often quite trapped in funding cycles. And I don't know whether you felt this. You probably, I know that academic institutions as well are often under pressure to constantly find new funding. And so practitioners often recognise that what they're doing is hard in both practical and ethical terms. And so this then led me to think about how does education program design interact with injustices? And I developed this taxonomy to think about, there are different ways, and often most interactions probably actually happen here, where we just accept the status quo. We just say, okay, this is how the donor wants it. I've got to get this proposal written. This is what I need to put in it to get the funding. I know it's probably not what's needed or what's right for the community, but it will help us get the funding. So you kind of ignore some of the kind of injustices and things that you think aren't right in the system, but you just go along with it because it's easier. So that, I think a lot of time that happens. On the second sort of other level is that people start saying, rejecting or they defend it, and they say no, it's all about child rights, and the West, we have these ways of doing things, and they are right. We've got evidence for it. We know that this is the way it's done. They do it like this in the UK. They do it like this in the US, and we know that it works there, and so we're going to do it everywhere else. It's a kind of defending and saying, no, we know best. It's quite a kind of neo-colonial West is best approach. And so you're kind of minimizing you kind of, you reject anyone who questions that view. Another approach is that people actually start acknowledging and saying, okay, actually maybe what we're doing isn't good. Maybe we need to start doing things differently. You start reflecting on your position of power, and also potentially tokenistic approaches. So, for example, if you're doing an event and you're bringing in partners, but they're there in a tokenistic way. So you wheel them out and you say, here is our local partner, and they're there to make the project look good, but you're not actually giving them the voice that they should have within a program. So that's about when people are starting to question and think, no, this isn't right. And then on another level, there's a kind of challenge. So saying, okay, we're gonna push back, and with what is called constructive complicity. And this is a term which was developed by Spivak in 1998, I think, and then has been used by Joseph Salisbury and also others. You think about how can we be more accepting that we are, I guess, implicated subjects. How can we be more constructively complicit to start thinking about changing the system, and not just accept it the way it is? And this is also about this sort of mutual learning, and this leads me to the sort of this top here, which is around how can we be more humble in our epistemology. So the term, I think, was first used by Pavainen and Srivastava, and Srivastava looked at UNESCO and how UNESCO was working during COVID in a crisis context, often going with technocratic approaches and solutions without having a kind of humility to stop and think, is this oppressive? Is this the right decision? We're not being humble about our world view. So at this top end, my proposition is that actually, if you are able to be more humble about the epistemologies that you're sort of interacting with, and that you're able to have more of a kind of co-design approach, so it's not a top down, but it's more a bubbling up and working in partnership, a true partnership, where programs are designed with the people who are going to be working on them, then you are less likely to be to maintain injustices. And yeah, so I guess the key thing there was one of the things that one of the practitioners says was nothing for them without them, and that was very much, he was talking about the fact that youth are often, that they have programs done to them, but they're often, even though they probably have a lot to say and a lot of capabilities to kind of be involved in education programming, they're often not involved in the design stage. So I think that's something about we're missing a trick really to not be involving youth in a more comprehensive way, and not just a tokenistic way. And one of the practitioner reflections was that I love that you're challenging it, so that I guess this is challenging the status quo. It's not spoken about enough, and it's good that you're going to rock the boat a bit with this. And so some of this research is actually about having the difficult conversations, the uncomfortable conversations that often one of the practitioners said, these are the things that we talk about sort of whispered as kind of water cooler conversations, but we don't have them in the kind of in the meetings at sort of organizational level, or with donors. And so yeah, I hope that has been helpful. And at the end, I've got 2 participant reflections which I'm going to leave you on, which hopefully are which I guess kind of conclude really the overall sort of the conclusion of my research. So one is that we're assuming that the values or the practices that we are used to in Europe, in the global north, should be applied by default to everywhere. And this goes for activities, for approaches, for policies, and for standards. And another participant reflected, we're not valuing indigenous knowledge. We're always seeing people as lacking capacity. We're always thinking that we are more superior than others. So we can talk of all this sexy global terms, global coined terminologies that may not mean much to the students and community we are working with. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that was helpful and interesting. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Geneviève. I'm now opening the floor to questions. If there are any questions on the floor or in the chat box. I had a question in the chat box.
Yes, let me have a look. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my scroller to get to the question. Hang on. I can't open it. One second.
Chris?
Right, I'm just trying to get the question. Oh, here we go. Right. Chat. Okay. So, yes. So, particular intention on more females than males. Yes. So that was about also that in international education in conflict and crisis, often there is, I guess, as I said before, a kind of feminization of education in that area. So that reflected that. And then the second question was, did you preset the categories, so the 4 perspectives? No. So I didn't know what those 4 perspectives were going to be. So that's what Q methodology does. Depending on, so what you can do, you run different analyses, and so it actually allows you to run different statistical modeling. So I chose centroid and varimax, which are just these different ways of doing factor analysis, and it there were options. So I had a look at, okay, what would three viewpoints look like? What would 4 viewpoints look like? What would 5 look like? And what ended up happening is that when there were 5, it was 2. One of them didn't really have enough sort of people grouped into that viewpoint, and it didn't really sort of reflect the people that I'd spoken to. It didn't really reflect I didn't really feel that it reflected a strong viewpoint. And so what ended up happening is when I did the pilot, what was quite interesting, when I did the pilot and I sort of played around with the statistical modeling, just three had come out, and there was a much smaller sample. I had a pilot with about 5 people. But no, the modeling basically, it's there is a qualitative interpretive sort of element to it. It's not just statistical. So you basically you want to have something which is statistically sound. So you have a kind of limit. So you want a certain number of viewpoints of participants to group at a certain statistical level, basically to a specific viewpoint. You don't, so it enables you to say, if you were to run this again, so what's quite interesting as well, so I've taken very much a kind of social constructionist perspective, like sort of epistemological approach. And so even if these same people redid this, oh, I'm frozen. Can you hear me?
Come closer. We can't
Even
now.
if
It was frozen.
oh, okay.
No, see the microphone there. Please come closer.
To the screen?
Yes. Professor Safora has a question. She'll come to the screen.
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
Better look on the screen.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Great. I don't have a methodological question. My brain doesn't function that way. I have more sort of a critical intervention.
Yes.
A question that critically intervenes. You sort of end on the 2 conclusions of neo-educational, neo-colonial educational systems versus people who are in favor of indigenous and our critical system. But I was wondering, throughout your sort of presentation, I got a sense of like education as this homogeneous kind of entity. Where is the sort of where does indigenous educational systems, how are they being addressed in any of this sort of thing? It feels almost like education is a thing that has to be brought to the people in conflict, but where is the local educational systems that seem to
and I think
exist like in
I guess this is I think you raise a really important point, and that's ultimately that it's not enough focused on, and so I guess what I think there's a real and what I've ended up calling my my dissertation is my thesis is the balancing act, that basically practitioners often have a desire to be more in sort of indigenous and locally led education systems, but often they're coming from organizations and systems and their own educational backgrounds which are Western focused, and so they have that lens and they struggle to I guess bring those 2 together, and so what ends up happening is that they'll just stick with the status quo, stick with what they know, and stick with a kind of Western approach, even if it might not be appropriate. Is that helpful? So I think what is often happening, and I don't know whether it would be really interesting to know from your perspectives on the education systems and contexts that you work in, whether you feel that this is an issue, or hopefully Indigenous sort of education systems have a stronger role?
But I think you put it really nicely when you said practitioners often don't view of the people they're trying to educate. I think that's sort of the problem, if you will. In a sense, because they don't share the same worldview, they don't see what's there, which could be alternate forms of education that already exist.
Yes.
And I've got examples in the discussion later on, if that's something of interest to you. But
yes, and that's a really interesting thing, actually. What?
So that's, I think that whole idea that you pointed to, that people don't share the same worldviews, is what then hides what's there. And so just to say, well, we need to collaborate with Indigenous systems, doesn't really work if you don't really share that framework. Do you know what I'm saying? If you can't shift the perspective, the framework of interpretation, then how do you see what's there?
Yeah, and I guess that's basically what I'm saying, is that those 4 viewpoints, I don't know if we go back to them, is that I guess that's where there are tensions, is that not everybody has the opinion that context and local education systems are the best. There's a lot who are very sort of in strong belief of the importance of global evidence to be applied on other contexts. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that there are different ways of that practitioners approach designing education programs, and I guess understanding that helps, I guess hopefully helps us to understand, you know, why are there sometimes, I guess, clashes in how things beliefs in how things should be done. And I guess that's that we all have a different way of approaching these. And there's no, I'm not to say that there's a right or a wrong way, but I guess it's what the research does is to sort of unpick some of those tensions between different ways of approaching education program design. But what the point that you made as well around the value of what is there, that did come out quite strongly in the interviews. People talked a lot about it shouldn't be sort of a needs based, but a kind of asset based. So, you know, if you're working in a context, really understanding what the strengths, what is already there, how do communities and what are the strengths within the system already.
Other questions from the floor? Chris, okay. There's a question on the chat box, please.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions.
Is there any new knowledge about education from the local context? How would it be recorded or contribute to current theories? I guess that kind of goes back to the discussion we just had around, just now, about the importance of local contextual knowledge from, and I guess what's quite tricky with this, because it was a global study, if this was one context specific, I would be able to kind of go into a lot more detail in terms of one specific context, but I think one of the things that came out was, for example, one of the practitioners talks about, well, what about in Southern Africa, for example, there's very much a kind of a focus on Ubuntu, which is much more about the collective rather than the role of the individual. and human rights often have a very kind of individual focus rather than collective well-being. So there were definitely things that came out from the research which talked about, I guess, the discussion we just had about sort of, you know, different worldviews often not being taken on board. So the question around how do you check for reliability and validity of findings? So what's quite interesting with Q methodology, because it's an inherently mixed methodology, you are not looking for the prevalence of an opinion within a population. You're looking for what are the shared viewpoints within that group of people, and so the validity comes from those participants' viewpoints. In terms of reliability, because in the research in my PhD paper, I detail quite specifically how I did the statistical analysis, and so I guess another person would be able to take the data and carry out the same approaches and come out with those 4 viewpoints. So that's, I guess, in terms of reliability, it's quite helpful because it's a set way of doing the doing the analysis. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. There being no other questions, I'd like to thank you, Geneviève, for your excellent presentation on the substance of designing education programs in conflict, exploring injustice stress, as well as the extra discussion on methodology with Q methodology and Vivo, Loom, etc. We had a glimpse of how they can be handled. And we're glad that we learn from you, because many students start to have one answer. This is the direction of my paper. And that I have the one solid answer, the God sent truth. You gave us 4 viewpoints, and you said they're fluid typologies. It doesn't mean one is separate from the other, but they are intersecting. And then you also showed us the division: global, local, international, indigenous. You had created an original taxonomy, and just like Dr. Mania, our friend, you insisted on humility in our research. We shouldn't have big claims that we know all of the answers. And then you had a very powerful decolonial approach. Aside from being a white woman, you're very critical of the global North, Western hegemonic approach. It's something great for us to hear from the global South, brown people from the global South. And maybe lastly, you also indicated that we should not have preconceived notion, like we already have the answer. I asked you this question explicitly, you said no, the themes emerge. So you cannot start research with a conclusion. We start research with first having the question. Previous research don't count. This is, as a researcher, starting from section 1, section 2, your introduction, research questions, and methodology. So thank you very much. We'd like to give you the last word, Geneviève.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Ray, and everybody for letting me share my research with you. As Ray said, I guess, one of the key things for me being a researcher is that every day I realize how much more there is to learn. And I have definitely, the whole process has made me hopefully a lot more humble, and I think hopefully open to the different ways of seeing the world. And I guess I share with all of you, I'm just in the final stages of writing up my PhD. And so I stand with you in solidarity. I know how hard it is, and I know that you can do it. We can do it. So I wish you all lots of good luck and good fortune, and lots of critical thinking and discussion. And often doing a PhD can be a very emotional roller coaster. So as well as sort of, you know, hurting your mind and you know, making you think really hard, often it can be very very emotional. So I wish you all the best with your critical thinking and your journeys to yeah, interrogate knowledge and learning new things and sharing new things with the world. So thank you so much for letting me share my little sort of my investigations and my thoughts with you.
Thank you, Geneviève. We appreciate your time with us. So let's give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. So please fill out the evaluators. You sign the appendices. Thank you. And